In exactly 157 days from now, just over 5 months, Japan will host one of the most prestigious sporting events in the world, which is the Olympics that were already delayed last year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The world's topmost athletes and spectators will want to reach Tokyo for the mega event. And it's only now that Japan has started its vaccination drive, and questions remain whether Tokyo will be able to achieve its targets before the mega event. Japan's COVID-19 vaccine rollout has finally begun, with health workers on priority. At a Tokyo hospital, the president of Tokyo Medical Center, Kazuhiro Araki, took the very first vaccine to encourage others to do the same.
皆さんに受けていただくという機運を高めるためには、院長がやはり率先して受ける必要があるだろうというふうに考えて、第1号で受けることにいたしました。
The first one to get vaccinated in Japan are the healthcare workers. There are around 100 medical facilities administered by the Health Ministry, as they plan on vaccinating around 40,000 medical workers first. Their second shot will be administered on the 10th of March.
受ける前はやっぱりちょっと恐怖心というかがやっぱり医療従事者もあったんですけど、受けてみたら本当に一瞬で終わったのと、全く痛みもなかったので、想像してたよりはそうですね想像してたよりは楽に受けられたかなと思っています。
Japan formally approved its first COVID-19 vaccine on Sunday. The announcement came after a government panel on Friday confirmed that final results of clinical testing done in Japan showed that vaccines had a similar efficacy to that indicated by tests done overseas.
14日にファイザー社の新型コロナワクチンについて有効性安全性を確認の上、厚生労働大臣から特例承認が行われ、本日から医療従事者の接種が開始をいたしました。9時ごろには独立行政法人国立病院機構東京医療センターにおいて最初の接種が行われたところで。
The world's third biggest economy is lagging behind with its vaccination drive. And that's because the government had asked for clinical testing of vaccines in Japan in addition to Pfizer's multinational tests, which did not include Japan. The approval process for another supplier, AstraZeneca, only started recently, while a third, Moderna, hasn't yet applied in Japan. As Japan is determined to hold the Tokyo Olympics this summer, swift vaccination of its population has become a top priority for Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga's government. Apart from the delay, the government is facing several other challenges on the vaccination front currently. They are concerned about the people's reluctance to take vaccines due to worries of side effects. Domestic vaccine development is still in its early stages, and Japan remains reliant on imports and is facing uncertainty in the supply of the required number of vaccines. It's also unclear if the already strained Japanese healthcare system will be able to treat the extra visitors. This during the upcoming Olympic Games, as they juggle between local patients and the mass vaccinations required. We are now joined by Professor James D. Brown, who's Associate Professor of Political Science at Temple University. For more details on Japan's vaccination drive, Professor, welcome to WION. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Just 5 months left for one of the biggest sporting events in the world, and Japan is keen on hosting the Olympics this summer. Is there enough time for Japan to meet its vaccination target before we hit the Games?
I think you have to say that that's very doubtful, that Japan has clearly been late in beginning its vaccination drive. I think there are 70 countries that have already begun ahead of Japan. And the minister who's in charge of Japan's vaccine efforts has made it clear that actually, as yet, there isn't a strategy to vaccinate the whole population. Currently, they have plans for health workers, for those with existing health conditions, and for those over 60. But beyond that, as yet, they don't have a strategy. So as your introduction mentioned, with so little time remaining until the Olympics, I think you have to say it's very doubtful to what extent the wider population can actually receive the vaccine before the start of the Games, if they do indeed happen.
You know, Professor, there are a couple of statements made by Katsunbo Kato, who's the chief cabinet secretary in Japan, and first I'll quote him. He said, I quote, "We are still trying to secure these special syringes," unquote. Now, Japan is struggling with special syringes needed to administer the vaccine. So even if they get the enough doses of Pfizer vaccine, there are concerns about syringes available to administer those vaccines to people. How can that be even possible in Japan, one of the most developed nations in the world? And like you mentioned, Japan's vaccination drive is the last to be launched among G7 industrialized nations.
Well, I think that's quite right. It's been very much something which has been a focus within the Japanese news, with people astonished that Japan hasn't been able to secure these special syringes. It really does seem to show a lack of planning. Japan should have had enough time to source these syringes. It's not been able to do so. Now, to be clear about the situation with these syringes, it doesn't mean that Japan can't use the vaccines. The vaccine provided by Pfizer comes in these vials, which provides for 6 shots. Now, with a standard syringe, it's possible to extract 5 doses from those vials, but you need a special syringe to extract that final dose. So the danger of not having the special syringes is that 1/6 of all of the supplies that Japan has sourced will be wasted because they won't be able to extract them from the vials. So that's the problem there.
Professor, one final question. Pfizer has been approved as we are learning, but what about the status of other vaccine candidates? Is Japan likely to approve other vaccine candidates? Because if you're only administering one vaccine, then it limits your chances of vaccinating enough people, because the world is facing supply chain issues, because every nation is fighting to get enough doses of vaccines to vaccinate its people. So what's the status as far as other vaccines are concerned? And what's the timetable that Japan is looking at vaccinating enough number of people in order to achieve herd immunity?
Okay, so the approval of the other vaccines cannot take place quickly. Japan has been very clear that they're going to take a risk-averse approach, which means carrying out the tests on their own population in their own ways. So that means the AstraZeneca trials are only beginning now, and Moderna vaccine has not even, that process hasn't even begun. So it's going to be weeks at best before additional vaccines can be introduced. And the problem there is it means that Japan's therefore very, very dependent on the supplies of the Pfizer vaccine. And so if there are delays, if there are problems in the supply of the Pfizer vaccine, then that's going to delay things further. Now, as to the timetable, to begin with, it's going to be very, very limited. At the moment, it's really just on a trial basis with around 40,000 health workers receiving the vaccine. And it's only going to be next month that we have this expanded to a wider range of health workers and then to the broader population in April. So that's as much as we know at the moment. So I think it remains the case that Japan seems to be really very much behind some other leading countries.
Professor James D. Brown, thank you so much for joining us. And this vaccination drive certainly presents a unique challenge for the government of Yoshihide Suga in Japan. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.